Blood dripped from Jasmine Washington's temple as 4 police cruisers surrounded her farmhouse. The officers aimed their weapons at her chest. "Final warning, the chief snarled. Then her Belgian Malinois emerged from Shadow's military tags, glinting. Everything changed when the body cam suddenly went dark. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against injustice and subscribe to follow Jasmine's incredible journey against corruption. What would you do if faced with armed officers on your own property? Jasmine Washington stepped out of her dusty pickup truck and inhaled deeply, taking in the familiar scent of Georgia clay and pine that defined her family's 15-acre farm. At 34, the decorated Army K-9 handler was finally home after 12 grueling years of military service that had taken her through 3 combat tours and countless missions she wasn't authorized to discuss. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered farmhouse that had belonged to generations of Washingtons, though the property was significantly smaller than it had been when her great-grandparents owned it. With her military pension and every penny of her life savings, Jasmine had purchased the property with dreams of establishing a specialized training center for service dogs, particularly for veterans suffering from PTSD. As she unloaded her duffel bags from the truck bed, Atlas and Shadow, her 2 Belgian Malinois with specialized military training, leaped gracefully to the ground. Their alert eyes scanned the surroundings with the same tactical precision they'd displayed in combat zones. "Home sweet home, boys," Jasmine murmured, watching as they cautiously explored their new territory. The dogs wore their military tags proudly, a reminder of the hundreds of missions they'd completed and the lives they'd saved by detecting explosives and neutralizing threats. That night, as Jasmine unpacked her modest belongings, memories flooded back of the specialized training programs she'd developed for military working dogs. She'd become legendary among handlers for her ability to train dogs to perform complex tactical maneuvers and respond to silent commands in chaotic environments. Her methods had saved countless American lives in Afghanistan and Iraq, earning her commendations that now sat in a shoebox under her bed. The following morning, Jasmine drove into town for supplies, a list of renovation materials clutched in her hand. The hardware store's bell jingled as she entered, but the friendly atmosphere instantly chilled. The white store owner glanced at her, then pointedly turned to help another customer who had entered after her. After 20 minutes of being deliberately ignored, Jasmine approached the counter. "Excuse me, I need some lumber and fencing supplies." The owner barely looked up. "We're out of most building materials. Try Macon, about 60 miles east." Jasmine glanced around at the fully stocked shelves. "Your sign says you have everything in stock." The man's face hardened. "Not for you. We reserve the right to refuse service." Similar encounters followed at the grocery store, where shoppers whispered slurs just loud enough for her to hear, and at the bank, where the loan officer suddenly claimed there were additional requirements for her business account that hadn't been mentioned over the phone. By week's end, the pattern was unmistakable. Jasmine visited her Uncle William, who still lived in the small house at the edge of what used to be their family's much larger property. His weathered face creased with concern as she described her reception. "It's gotten worse since you left, baby girl," he said, pouring her sweet tea from a pitcher. "Sheriff Donovan Brooks runs this county now, and he's got a special interest in making sure folks like us don't get too comfortable owning land." Uncle William explained how Sheriff Brooks, along with Judge Harris and Mayor Whitfield, had been systematically targeting black property owners for years. Inflated property taxes, fraudulent code violations, and even criminal charges had forced many families to sell at fractions of their property's worth. "They're clearing the way for something big," Uncle William said. "Nobody knows exactly what, but there's money behind it, big money." That evening, while walking the perimeter of her property with Atlas and Shadow, Jasmine discovered surveying stakes hammered into the ground along her eastern boundary. Someone had been on her land without permission. The dogs growled, picking up unfamiliar scents. Back at the house, Jasmine found an envelope that had been slipped under her door while she was out. Inside was a crudely printed note. "This land isn't for your kind. Sell now or face consequences. Final warning." Jasmine pinned the note to her kitchen bulletin board and stared at it, her military training kicking in as she began to formulate a defensive strategy. This wasn't Afghanistan, but somehow she'd returned home to find herself in another kind of war zone. The crunch of tires on gravel alerted Jasmine before Atlas and Shadow began their low warning growls. She stepped onto the porch as a sheriff's department SUV and 2 patrol cars pulled into her driveway, kicking up clouds of red Georgia dust. Sheriff Donovan Brooks emerged from the SUV, a tall man with a florid face and mirrored sunglasses that reflected Jasmine's own image back at her. 2 deputies flanked him, hands resting casually on their holstered weapons. "Ms. Washington," Brooks called out, not bothering to approach the porch. "We've received multiple complaints about dangerous animals on this property. Apparently, you're harboring military-grade attack dogs in a residential area." Jasmine maintained her composure, the same steady calm that had kept her alive in combat zones. "These are highly trained service animals, Sheriff. They're registered and documented with the Department of Defense." She reached for the documents she'd already prepared, anticipating this visit. As she descended the porch steps, Atlas and Shadow moved precisely into position beside her, their posture alert but disciplined. She noticed the immediate tension in the deputy's body language. One of them, younger than the others, with a nameplate reading Rivera, seemed particularly fixated on the dogs. "Ma'am, those animals look like the same breed that mauled a child in Macon last month," Brooks said, his hand now resting more deliberately on his weapon. "We have ordinances about dangerous breeds in this county." Jasmine handed him the documentation. "Belgian Malinois aren't on any dangerous breed list in Georgia, Sheriff. These dogs have served our country with distinction, saved American lives, and have better training than most police K-9 units. They respond only to specific commands and handlers." Brooks barely glanced at the papers before handing them to a deputy. He produced a citation pad and began writing. "Well, I'm citing you for unsafe animal containment. Your fencing doesn't meet county code for animals of this nature." Jasmine had spent the week installing military-grade kennels and secure fencing that exceeded any residential code requirement. "I'd like to see the specific ordinance, please." She pulled out her phone and began recording the interaction. "Georgia is a one-party consent state for recording, Sheriff. I'm exercising that right." Brooks's face darkened, but he maintained his official tone. "You military types think you know all the angles, don't you? This citation stands. You can contest it in Judge Harris's court next Tuesday if you want to waste your time." As they turned to leave, the young deputy, Rivera, lingered behind momentarily. His eyes met Jasmine's with an unspoken message before he hurried after his colleagues. The following day, Jasmine visited the county clerk's office and requested copies of all animal containment ordinances. The clerk, a middle-aged white woman, reluctantly provided them after Jasmine insisted. There was nothing in the documentation that her kennels violated. She also discovered through careful questioning that 5 other property owners had received similar citations in the past 3 months. All were black. On her way home, Jasmine stopped at a small farm where an elderly man was struggling to repair a tractor. She introduced herself to Elijah Johnson, who explained he was fighting foreclosure after his property taxes had mysteriously tripled last year. "Been farming this land 52 years, he said, wiping his brow. "Suddenly they say it's worth 3 times what it was, but nobody's offering to buy it for that price. Just trying to force me out." Back home, Jasmine began meticulously documenting everything. She installed security cameras at strategic points around her property, concealing some in trees and outbuildings. She modified her training regimen with Atlas and Shadow, teaching them new civilian protection protocols while maintaining their military discipline. 3 days later, she awoke to the sound of metal crashing. From her window, she saw her mailbox lying destroyed on the ground. Her security footage showed a sheriff's department cruiser driving away just minutes earlier, though the license plate was deliberately muddied to obscure identification. Jasmine stood in the dawn light surveying the damage and made a decision. If Sheriff Brooks wanted war, she would give him one, but on her terms with strategy and evidence. She wouldn't be driven from her home like so many others before her. What would you do if the very people sworn to protect you became your persecutors? Comment number 1. If you believe Jasmine should fight back against this corruption, or number 2, if you think she should sell her land and find peace elsewhere. Like this video if you're ready to see justice served, and subscribe to follow this powerful story of resistance against systematic oppression. Now, let's see how Jasmine begins to build her defense against Sheriff Brooks and his corrupt department. The community center off Route 47 wasn't much to look at a repurposed gas station with mismatched chairs and a coffee maker that had seen better days. But on Thursday evening, it became command central for what Jasmine was now thinking of as her counterinsurgency operation. Marcus Thompson, a burly mechanic whose garage had been hit with mysterious code violations after he repaired cars for black customers at fair prices, was the first to arrive. Dr. Amara Williams followed a veterinarian who'd lost clients after treating Elijah Johnson's farm animals despite warnings from Brooks's deputies. Pastor James Green completed the initial group, his church having recently faced trumped-up noise complaints despite being well outside residential areas. "The pattern's clear," Jasmine explained, pinning photos and documents to a corkboard she'd brought. "They're targeting black-owned properties in specific areas, primarily along the eastern county border and along the proposed highway expansion route." She outlined what she'd learned, how Sheriff Brooks, Judge Harris, and Mayor Whitfield operated as a coordinated unit to pressure black landowners into selling. Pastor Green nodded gravely. "My congregation has lost 7 families in the past year alone." Suddenly facing evictions, job losses, even criminal charges for minor infractions white folks never get ticketed for. Dr. Williams added, "They've started pressuring my landlord to cancel my lease." Said there were hygiene concerns at a veterinary clinic that's passed every state inspection with flying colors. As they shared information, the door opened and a young Latino man in civilian clothes entered cautiously. Jasmine recognized him immediately as the deputy from Brooks's visit. "Officer Rivera," she said, her posture tensing. Atlas and Shadow, who had been lying quietly in the corner, raised their heads attentively. "Miguel," he corrected, showing empty hands in a gesture of peace. "Miguel Rivera. And I'm taking a huge risk being here." He explained that he'd recognized Jasmine from a brief deployment to Afghanistan 3 years earlier, where he'd served as military police before joining the sheriff's department upon returning home. "I was there when your dog team saved an entire platoon from an IED trap," he said. "Never forgot it." Miguel revealed that Sheriff Brooks ran what he called special operations, targeted harassment campaigns against specific property owners. "There's a map in his office with red pins on all the properties they want," Miguel explained. "They call it pest control, clearing out undesirable elements before some big development project breaks ground." He couldn't access the map directly, but he'd memorized several addresses, all belonging to black landowners, including Jasmine's farm. Over the next 2 weeks, their network expanded. Jasmine applied her military intelligence training, creating secure communication protocols and evidence collection standards. She taught her allies how to legally record interactions with authorities and document every potential violation of their rights. Through careful research at the county archives, assisted by a sympathetic librarian whose grandmother had lost land to similar tactics in the 1960s, Jasmine discovered something significant. The properties being targeted formed a pattern around areas with suspected mineral deposits, specifically rare earth elements essential for technology manufacturing. Additionally, the proposed highway expansion would dramatically increase land values along certain corridors. Miguel continued providing crucial information, though always carefully to avoid detection. He confirmed that Brooks was becoming increasingly frustrated with Jasmine's resistance. "He's used to people getting scared and selling out fast," Miguel reported during a clandestine meeting. "You're different, and it's making him nervous." The group retained Vanessa Chen, a civil rights attorney from Atlanta who specialized in cases of systematic discrimination. She helped them establish a legal defense fund and began preparing documentation for potential state and federal complaints. Jasmine invested in specialized equipment through her military contacts, legal surveillance countermeasures that would help protect their meetings and communications from Brooks' increasingly aggressive monitoring. One night, Jasmine's security system alerted her to movement near her property line. The footage showed 2 deputies placing something in the underbrush just inside her fence. Atlas and Shadow accompanied her as she investigated the dog's specialized training, allowing them to indicate the presence of illegal substances without contaminating the evidence. Jasmine photographed but didn't touch the planted drugs, instead documenting the deputies' actions with time-stamped video. The next day, a court order arrived signed by Judge Harris authorizing an animal safety inspection of Jasmine's property and kennels. The document cited anonymous complaints about potential animal fighting activities. Miguel called that night, his voice tense. "Brooks is planning something big tomorrow. Be careful. They're coming with animal control and a search warrant. They've been talking about asset forfeiture, taking your land, and everything on it." Jasmine thanked him and immediately activated her network. If Brooks wanted to play hardball, he was about to learn he'd picked the wrong veteran to intimidate. Would you stand with Jasmine against this corruption, or would the risk be too great? What evidence do you think will finally expose Sheriff Brooks and his corrupt system? Stay tuned to see how this courageous veteran uses her military training to fight back against injustice on her own soil. The morning sun had barely cleared the pine trees when the convoy arrived, 3 Sheriff's Department vehicles, an animal control van, and Brooks' personal SUV. Jasmine watched from her kitchen window as they assembled in her driveway, a tactical formation that struck her as unnecessarily aggressive for a simple inspection. Atlas and Shadow sensed her tension, positioning themselves strategically near the door. Jasmine activated her hidden camera system with a discreet press of her phone, then stepped onto the porch. "Good morning, Sheriff. I see you've brought quite a crowd for this inspection." Brooks approached with a clipboard and a satisfied smirk. "Ms. Washington, we have a warrant to search these premises for evidence of illegal dogfighting and controlled substances." He handed her the document. "Animal control will be evaluating your dogs for signs of fighting or abuse. I suggest you cooperate fully." Jasmine scanned the warrant, noting Judge Harris's signature and the vague description of reliable information from confidential informants. She recognized the legal overreach, but nodded calmly. "My dogs are service animals with Department of Defense training certificates. They've never participated in any fighting, but please inspect away." She gestured toward the professional kennels and training area she'd constructed. "I'll accompany you, of course." Brooks frowned. "You'll remain on the porch with Deputy Larson while we conduct our search." The deputy, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, moved to block Jasmine's path. She recognized the tactic separate her from the search so evidence could be planted. "Actually, Sheriff Georgia Law permits me to observe the execution of a search warrant on my property, provided I don't interfere. I'll maintain a reasonable distance." Brooks looked like he might argue, but instead turned to the animal control officer. "Start with the kennels. Those dogs need to be secured before we proceed further." The animal control officer, a nervous young woman who introduced herself as Tracy, approached the dogs cautiously. "Ma'am, I need to leash your animals." Jasmine gave a subtle hand signal to Atlas and Shadow, who sat perfectly still, allowing themselves to be leashed without resistance. Their discipline impressed Tracy, who commented, "They're very well trained." 3 years in combat zones tends to instill good habits, Jasmine replied loud enough for everyone to hear. As the search began, Jasmine noticed the deputies splitting up. 2 headed for the barn, while Brooks and another deputy began searching the house. Using the reflection in her kitchen window, she saw one deputy distract the other while slipping something into his pocket from an evidence bag. Jasmine gave a silent command to Atlas, who was still with the animal control officer in the yard. The dog's ears perked up, and he made a show of straining at his leash toward the barn. Tracy struggled briefly before Jasmine intervened. "He's alerting to something. He's trained to detect certain chemicals and explosives. May I?" With Tracy's nervous permission, Jasmine approached the barn with Atlas, arriving just as the deputies emerged. "Find anything interesting?" she asked innocently. The deputy with the bulging pocket startled. "Ma'am, you need to stay back." Atlas growled softly, eyes fixed on the deputy's pocket. Jasmine gave another subtle command, and Atlas sat still, staring intently at the deputy. The man shifted uncomfortably. Meanwhile, Jasmine had been recording everything through a body camera disguised as a button on her flannel shirt, streaming to secure cloud storage. Additionally, her hidden property cameras were capturing multiple angles of the search. Sheriff Brooks emerged from the house, his expression triumphant. "Well, Ms. Washington, seems your military background hasn't kept you on the straight and narrow." He nodded to a deputy who held up a small bag of white powder. "Found this in your bedside table." Another deputy emerged from the barn. "And we found these in the feed room." He displayed a set of breaksticks and heavy chains tools commonly associated with dogfighting, but which Jasmine had never seen before. "This is absurd," Jasmine said calmly, making sure her camera captured everything. "Those items weren't there yesterday. I'm being framed, and I have proof." She reached for her phone. "I've been live streaming this entire inspection to my attorney and several military contacts." Brooks' face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing her phone. "That's evidence now. You're under arrest for possession of controlled substances and animal fighting paraphernalia." As deputies moved to handcuff her, Jasmine remained composed. "Sheriff, you should know that my phone isn't the only recording device operating right now. Multiple backup systems are in place, and everything you've done today has been documented and uploaded to secure servers." Brooks hesitated momentarily before regaining his confident demeanor. "Nice try, Washington. Book her," he ordered the deputies, "and get animal control to take those vicious animals to the shelter. They'll need to be evaluated before they're put down." Jasmine maintained her military bearing as they handcuffed her, but her heart raced at the threat to Atlas and Shadow. Tracy from Animal Control looked uncertain. "Sir, these dogs haven't shown any aggressive behavior or signs of fighting. They're clearly well-trained service animals." Brooks turned his glare on her. "They're evidence in a criminal investigation now. Do your job or find another one." As Jasmine was led to the patrol car, she locked eyes with her dogs, giving them a final silent command to cooperate. Shadow and Atlas watched with alert intelligence as they were loaded into the animal control van, their military tags catching the morning sunlight. In the patrol car, Jasmine felt a moment of genuine fear, not for herself, but for her companions. She'd survived firefights and IED attacks in war zones, but this betrayal on American soil by those sworn to uphold the law cut deeper than enemy fire ever had. As the car pulled away, she glimpsed Miguel watching from another vehicle, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes conveying a silent promise this wasn't over. The steel door of cell number 14 clanged shut behind Jasmine with a finality that echoed through the concrete corridor of Weston County Jail. The sound was nothing like the rhythmic percussion of gunfire she'd grown accustomed to during deployments, yet somehow it felt more threatening. Home sweet home, drawled the corrections officer, a heavy-set woman with disinterested eyes. Judge Harris won't be in until Monday, so get comfortable. The cell was bare bones, a metal bunk with a thin mattress, a stainless steel toilet sink combination, and a small desk bolted to the wall. The previous occupant had scratched a calendar into the paint with 43 marks before they'd stopped counting. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bunk, her mind racing through tactical scenarios like she was back in combat planning. The difference was that in Afghanistan, she'd known who the enemy was. Here the lines were blurred by badges and laws, twisted to serve corruption. Within an hour, she was taken to processing, where she learned the full extent of the charges against her possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute animal cruelty, operating an illegal animal fighting enterprise, and resisting arrest, a charge fabricated after the fact. The booking officer, a thin man with a perpetual sneer, informed her that bail had been set at $100,000. Judge Harris takes drug and animal cases very seriously, he said with poorly concealed satisfaction, especially when they involve certain folks who don't know their place. During her first meal in the common area, Jasmine began to recognize a pattern among her fellow inmates. Terrell Jenkins arrested for trespassing on land his family had farmed for generations until the property line was mysteriously redrawn. Sophia Williams held on shoplifting charges after questioning why her grandmother's nursing home bill had suddenly doubled. Marcus Davis caught with drug residue in his car the day after he spoke at a county meeting about discriminatory policing. Brooks has been running this county like his personal plantation for 8 years, Sophia explained quietly over bland mashed potatoes. Judge Harris rubber stamps whatever he wants, and Mayor Whitfield makes sure the money flows to keep it all running smoothly. Terrell nodded. My cousin worked at the county assessor's office until she started asking questions about property tax adjustments that only seemed to affect black landowners. 2 days later, they found marijuana in her desk drawer. Now she's serving 18 months in state prison. The following afternoon, Jasmine received her first visitor. Vanessa Chen arrived with a leather portfolio and an expression of controlled outrage. In the dingy visitation room, she kept her voice low. The live stream was jammed shortly after it began. They're using some kind of signal blocker around your property now. But she leaned closer. Your friend Sarah Thompson received about 12 minutes of footage before it cut out. It clearly shows the deputy removing something from his pocket before finding it in your barn. Jasmine felt a surge of hope. What about Atlas and Shadow? Vanessa's expression darkened. They're being held at County Animal Control. Brooks has filed a petition to have them classified as dangerous animals and scheduled for euthanasia. The hearing is set for Thursday. Jasmine's hands tightened into fists beneath the table. Those dogs saved American lives. They have commendations from the Department of Defense. They can't just kill them. I've filed emergency motions citing their service animal status and military documentation, Vanessa assured her. But Judge Harris will be presiding, so... She didn't need to finish the sentence. The system was rigged, and they both knew it. Later that evening, as Jasmine was returning from a shower, a corrections officer she hadn't seen before gestured her into an empty corridor. When they were alone, the woman spoke quickly. Officer Rivera asked me to give you a message. Mayor Whitfield is meeting with Chinese investors tomorrow about something called Project Harvest Moon. It involves mineral extraction and a technology manufacturing facility. The land they need includes your property and 11 others all owned by black families. The officer glanced nervously over her shoulder. Also, someone broke into the animal control facility last night. Nothing was reported missing, but the security cameras were offline for 23 minutes. Before Jasmine could respond, the officer returned to her professional demeanor and escorted her back to her cell. That night, lying on the thin mattress, Jasmine reflected on her training in psychological warfare and resistance. She began to identify potential allies among the jail staff, the young officer who'd passed Miguel's message, a kitchen worker who'd given her an extra serving of fruit. a maintenance man who'd nodded respectfully when he saw her military tattoo. She also cataloged potential adversaries, including several officers who seemed particularly loyal to Brooks. 3 days into her incarceration, Vanessa returned with troubling news. "The Attorney General has taken a personal interest in your case. That's unusual for a county-level drug charge." She pushed a newspaper across the table. The headline read, "A.G. Carson targets rural drug operations, promises cleanup of criminal elements." "Carson is Judge Harris's brother-in-law," Vanessa explained, "and he's been linked to several development deals across the state where coincidentally black landowners were displaced following criminal charges or tax seizures." The pieces were falling into place, a conspiracy that reached beyond the county to state-level officials, all focused on acquiring land through any means necessary. As visiting hours ended, Jasmine received word that her Uncle William had been hospitalized after a single-vehicle accident on a straight stretch of county road he'd driven without incident for 40 years. The accident had occurred hours after he'd spoken to a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about historical land theft in the county. That night, in the darkness of her cell, Jasmine heard the soft voice of the sympathetic corrections officer outside her door. "Your dogs are safe," she whispered. "Dr. Williams has them. Rivera helped arrange it." The animal control officer reported 2 dangerous strays were euthanized instead. For the first time since her arrest, Jasmine allowed herself a genuine smile. The counteroffensive had begun. Have you ever wondered how far ordinary people will go to fight injustice when the entire system is corrupted against them? Comment number 1. If you believe an underground resistance network is justified when facing systemic corruption. Or number 2. If you think working within the system is always the better path. Like this video if you're inspired by Jasmine's courage, and subscribe to follow how this extraordinary veteran and her loyal companions continue their fight against overwhelming odds. Now let's discover how Jasmine's allies are working behind the scenes to expose the truth. Sarah Thompson hunched over her laptop in the back room of Dr. Williams' veterinary clinic, her fingers flying across the keyboard as lines of code scrolled across the screen. The former military cybersecurity specialist had caught the first red eye from Colorado after receiving Jasmine's emergency backup transmission. "Signals bouncing through 17 different proxies," she muttered to Dr. Williams, who was carefully examining Atlas's paw pad. They won't be able to trace the original live stream back to Jasmine's property. In the makeshift safe house, a rarely used storage room behind the clinic, Atlas and Shadow rested on clean blankets, their alert eyes following every movement. The midnight extraction from the county animal control facility had been a precision operation worthy of their military background. Miguel had created a diversion with a false report of loose dogs on the highway, while Dr. Williams, using access codes provided by Tracy, the sympathetic animal control officer, had entered the facility through a rear maintenance door. The security camera loop had been Sarah's contribution, remotely installed through a vulnerability in the county's outdated system. The dogs had recognized Dr. Williams from their previous checkups and followed her silently to a waiting van. By dawn, their euthanasia had been officially recorded, complete with falsified documentation. "They wanted to murder decorated war heroes," Dr. Williams said, gently stroking Shadow's head. "Animals who saved more American lives than Brooks and his deputies ever will." Sarah nodded grimly, closing her laptop. "And they framed a decorated veteran who spent 12 years in combat zones protecting their right to be corrupt pieces of trash." The underground network Jasmine had begun building was now operating at full capacity. Pastor Green's church became a coordination center, with church activities providing cover for strategy meetings. Marcus Thompson converted his garage's back office into a secure communications hub. Elijah Johnson, despite his age, served as a courier, his daily farm routines allowing him to move messages without suspicion. Outside the jail, public pressure was mounting. Pastor Green led daily prayer vigils that grew into protests as more community members recognized the pattern of injustice. Civil rights organizations from Atlanta sent representatives, and national media began picking up the story of a decorated veteran being persecuted after returning home. Miguel continued his dangerous double role, feeding information to the network while maintaining his position in the sheriff's department. "Brooks is getting desperate," he reported during a clandestine meeting with Sarah and Vanessa Chen. "He's destroying records and pressuring witnesses. The mayor's panicking too. The Chinese investors want guarantees about the mineral rights, and the timeline is getting tight." Through careful investigation of county archives and land records, the group discovered that Jasmine's family farm sat atop one of the richest deposits of rare earth minerals in the eastern United States. These elements, critical for manufacturing everything from smartphones to military equipment, had become increasingly valuable as tensions with traditional supplier nations escalated. The development project, operating under the innocuous name Harvest Moon Agricultural Innovation Center, was actually a front for a major extraction and processing facility. The true purpose explained the Attorney General's unusual interest with Chinese investment threatened by growing trade restrictions. Domestic sources of these minerals had become a national security priority. Tragically, the network suffered a serious blow when Jasmine's uncle William died in the hospital 3 days after his suspicious accident. The official cause was listed as complications from injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident. But Dr. Williams, who had consulted with a medical examiner friend, noted inconsistencies in the report. "The internal bleeding pattern doesn't match the reported trauma from the crash," she explained grimly during an emergency meeting. The loss galvanized the community further. At Williams' funeral, over 200 people gathered, many wearing shirts with the phrase, "I own my land," printed across the chest. News cameras captured the powerful images, and the story began trending on social media. From her jail cell, Jasmine coordinated complex strategies, using coded messages passed through Vanessa during legal visits and through the sympathetic corrections officer during her shifts. Her military training in asymmetric warfare proved invaluable as she developed a multi-layered plan that would unfold like a tactical operation. Sarah, using specialized equipment borrowed from military contacts, detected surveillance devices planted around Dr. Williams' clinic and Pastor Green's church. Rather than removing them, the group used them to feed false information to Brooks and his allies. Meanwhile, the real planning happened in Miguel's apartment, which they regularly swept for bugs. Tracy from Animal Control provided crucial information about county officials' movements, having positioned herself as a sympathetic ear for gossip among department administrative staff. She reported that Mayor Whitfield had scheduled a private meeting with investors and Attorney General Carson for Friday evening at City Hall after regular business hours. Elijah Johnson, while delivering produce to the mayor's secretary, a side business that gave him access to many official buildings, overheard discussions about finalizing the acquisition timeline and displacement compensation rates. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together, revealing a conspiracy that had been unfolding for years. "They've been systematically driving out black landowners," Vanessa explained during a strategy session. "Property tax reassessments, fraudulent code violations, criminal charges, all targeted at specific properties they need for this project." Atlas and Shadow, meanwhile, underwent intensive training with Sarah, who had experience with military working dogs. She taught them additional commands and signals that would be crucial for the operation they were planning. The dogs, with their exceptional intelligence and training, learned quickly, adding to their already impressive repertoire of skills. On Thursday afternoon, Miguel delivered the most critical piece of information, yet Jasmine was scheduled to be transferred to the state correctional facility the following morning, placing her beyond the reach of local allies and making her case much more difficult to fight. The timetable suddenly compressed, forcing the network to accelerate their plans. That evening, Pastor Green led the largest protest yet outside the county courthouse, deliberately drawing attention and resources away from the jail. As Brooks and most of his deputies responded to control the crowd, the final preparations were put in place. Sarah installed a specialized device on the jail's electrical system, while Dr. Williams prepared a medical emergency kit. Vanessa filed last-minute motions that would require the clerk's office to stay open late, keeping Judge Harris occupied. By midnight, everything was in position. Atlas and Shadow waited in Marcus's van behind the jail, wearing their military tactical vests restored by a local seamstress who'd lost her son in Afghanistan. Sarah monitored the security systems from her laptop. Miguel stood ready inside, and Dr. Williams prepared for potential casualties, praying they wouldn't be necessary. The message passed to Jasmine was simple. Operation Liberty begins at 0200. Be ready. What would you risk to stand against corruption that has infected an entire system? How far would you go to protect your home and heritage from those who abuse their power to take what isn't theirs? The most dangerous phase of Jasmine's fight for justice is about to begin, and nothing will ever be the same in Weston County again. At precisely 2 a.m, the Weston County Jail plunged into darkness. The emergency generators, which should have activated, immediately remained silent, their startup mechanisms disabled by Sarah's careful sabotage. In the momentary confusion, Miguel moved through the darkened corridors with a penlight reaching Jasmine's cell as planned. 2 minutes, he whispered, unlocking the door with a key he'd risked his career to duplicate. Shift change confusion plus the blackout should buy us 15 minutes before they confirm you're missing. Jasmine followed him through the service corridors she'd memorized from the blueprints Sarah had obtained. They encountered no one until reaching the laundry room, where a startled night janitor looked up from his phone. Before he could speak, Miguel flashed his badge. "Security drill. You didn't see us." The man nodded quickly and turned away. The service exit led to a small parking area where Marcus waited with his van engine running. Inside, Atlas and Shadow greeted Jasmine with disciplined enthusiasm, responding to her hand signals to remain quiet and alert. Dr. Williams handed Jasmine a change of clothes and a baseball cap to conceal her face. City Hall's security system will be disrupted for exactly 7 minutes, starting at 2:30. Sarah explained, not looking up from her laptop. The investment meeting's running late. They're still in the mayor's office on the 2nd floor. A.G. Carson arrived 20 minutes ago. Marcus drove carefully, maintaining exactly the speed limit, taking a circuitous route to avoid the main streets where deputies might be patrolling. They parked 3 blocks from City Hall in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse. Jasmine changed into black tactical pants and a dark windbreaker that concealed the lightweight body armor Dr. Williams had borrowed from a security guard friend. She checked Atlas and Shadow's tactical vests, making sure the specialized equipment was secured properly. Vanessa's filed emergency motions with the federal court. Sarah updated her. The moment we have the evidence, she'll pull the trigger on them. And Pastor Green has 3 news crews standing by. They think they're covering a dawn prayer service, but they'll get a much bigger story. Jasmine nodded, her mind shifting into the familiar clarity of mission focus. Everyone clear on the extraction plan. The group confirmed their roles and timing. If everything went according to plan, they would have the evidence they needed and be clear before the county-wide manhunt for Jasmine kicked into high gear. At 2:29, Jasmine and her dogs moved silently toward City Hall, using the shadows and landscaping for cover just as they had in combat zones. Sarah's voice came through the earpiece. "Security cameras looping now. South entrance alarm disabled. You have 7 minutes." The service door opened with the key code Miguel had provided. Inside the building was dimly lit by emergency lighting. Jasmine gave Atlas and Shadow their commands with hand signals, and they moved ahead, leading her toward the stairs, their training allowing them to detect any human presence with their acute senses. The 2nd floor was deserted except for light spilling from beneath the mayor's office door at the end of the hall. Voices carried through Mayor Whitfield's nervous tenor, the Attorney General's confident baritone, and several accented voices presumably belonging to the investors. Jasmine positioned herself in an adjacent conference room where Sarah had confirmed the building's thin walls would allow conversation to be overheard. She activated the recording device concealed in Shadow's vest. "The properties will be cleared within 60 days, the Attorney General was saying. "The final holdouts are being processed through the legal system. The Washington property is particularly valuable given the concentration of lanthanum and neodymium deposits." "But the publicity is becoming problematic," Mayor Whitfield argued. "These protests, the media attention, will disappear when we announce the job creation benefits," Carson interrupted. 500 positions, most requiring minimal education. The local population will forget all about a few troublemakers once we're cutting ribbons." One of the accented voices spoke. "Our agreement specified clean titles to all properties by the end of the quarter. These complications were not disclosed during initial negotiations." "The titles will be clean," the Attorney General assured them. "Judge Harris has the forfeiture proceedings ready to file. Sheriff Brooks has handled the evidence collection personally. The Washington woman will serve minimum 10 years, and her property will revert to the county through civil forfeiture." Jasmine had heard enough. She signaled Atlas and Shadow to follow her to the records room across the hall, their primary objective. Inside, she used the key code Miguel had provided to access the secure filing system. Sarah had identified specific file numbers containing the documentation of the conspiracy tax reassessment orders court records and the full Project Harvest Moon proposal showing the targeted properties. As Jasmine photographed crucial documents with a specialized camera in Atlas's vest, the building's emergency lighting suddenly brightened. The security system was coming back online ahead of schedule. "Sarah?" she whispered into her communication device. "Working on it," came the tense reply. "Something triggered a secondary system. You have 2 minutes max before full functionality returns." Jasmine worked faster, photographing as many documents as possible. She had just closed the final file when the door to the records room swung open. Sheriff Brooks stood in the doorway, weapon drawn. "Well, well. Jailbreak and breaking and entering. You're really racking up the charges, Washington." Behind him, 2 deputies appeared, their hands on their holsters. Jasmine remained perfectly still, her military training taking over. "You won't get away with this, Brooks. The mineral rights scheme, the targeted harassment of black landowners, the falsified evidence, it's all documented now." Brooks's face contorted with rage. "You think anybody's going to believe a drug dealer with a history of PTSD? Your word against the entire county leadership?" He gestured with his weapon. "Those attack dogs move an inch, my deputies will put them down for good this time." Jasmine gave an imperceptible hand signal. Atlas and Shadow remained motionless, but their muscles tensed ready. "These attack dogs saved 37 American soldiers from IEDs in Afghanistan," Jasmine said calmly. "They've got more medals than you've got integrity." Just then, the hallway erupted with activity. Miguel appeared behind the deputies, his weapon drawn. "Sheriff, put down your weapon. State police are in the building." Brooks turned, momentarily confused. "Rivera." "What the hell are you doing?" Taking advantage of the distraction, Jasmine gave the command. Atlas and Shadow executed a perfect tactical maneuver, launching forward in synchronized motion. Atlas knocked the weapon from Brooks's hand with precision, while Shadow circled behind, cutting off the deputies' access to their holsters. Neither dog bit or injured anyone. Their training was too precise for unnecessary force. They simply contained the threat, using their bodies as barriers. Miguel kept his weapon trained on Brooks. "I've been working with the State Police Internal Affairs Division for 7 months, Sheriff. They've been building a case against you, the judge, and the AG. I just needed the final evidence." The sheriff's face drained of color as 4 state police officers in tactical gear appeared behind Miguel. "This is a local police matter," Brooks blustered. "You have no jurisdiction." The lead state officer stepped forward. "Actually, we do. Governor signed the authorization yesterday after reviewing preliminary evidence of civil rights violations and corruption." "You're done, Brooks." As the state police secured Brooks and his deputies, Miguel explained to Jasmine that the investigation had been ongoing for months, but they'd lacked hard evidence connecting the county officials to the mineral rights scheme and targeted property seizures. Your security footage, plus what you just recovered here, completes the case. Jasmine and her dogs were escorted safely from the building through a service entrance, avoiding the growing crowd of officers and officials at the main doors. Outside, Dr. Williams waited in a different vehicle than they'd arrived in. "Pastor Green's already contacted the media," she said as they drove away, "and Vanessa's filed the federal emergency motions with the evidence Sarah transmitted." Brooks, seeing his carefully constructed empire crumbling, made one desperate move. As he was being led to a state police vehicle, he broke free, grabbed a deputy's sidearm, and fired at Jasmine. Atlas reacted instantly, launching himself between Jasmine and the bullet, tackling Brooks to the ground. The sheriff was quickly subdued, and Dr. Williams confirmed Atlas was uninjured. His tactical vest had stopped the bullet. By dawn, Attorney General Carson was being questioned by federal agents. Judge Harris had been served with warrants for his arrest. Mayor Whitfield was reportedly cooperating with authorities, turning over documents in exchange for leniency. And Jasmine, her loyal companions at her side, watched the sunrise from Elijah Johnson's farm, finally free, but knowing the fight for justice was far from over. The federal courthouse in Atlanta imposed a different kind of order than the corrupt systems of Weston County. As Jasmine took the witness stand on the 14th day of hearings, she faced a panel of investigators from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, and the state's newly formed Land Rights Restoration Task Force. Atlas and Shadow lay at her feet, their presence approved by the federal judge who'd cited their service animal status and relevance to the case. Ms. Washington began the lead federal prosecutor. Please describe when you first became aware of the systematic targeting of black landowners in Weston County. Over the next 3 hours, Jasmine methodically outlined the evidence they'd gathered, the pattern of harassment, the falsified charges, the coordinated efforts of county officials to drive black families from their land. The investigation had expanded dramatically in the weeks since Brooks' arrest. Federal agents had uncovered records dating back more than 30 years, revealing a consistent pattern of land theft targeting black families throughout the region. The mineral rights that made Jasmine's property so valuable had been discovered in a geological survey commissioned by a mining corporation in 1992. Since then, through various front companies and political proxies, they had been systematically acquiring properties through what one federal investigator termed legalized theft. Most shocking was the discovery of historical documents in the county archives that had been deliberately misfiled and obscured. These records revealed that Jasmine's family had once owned not just 15 acres, but over 200 acres of the most mineral-rich land in the county. Through a series of fraudulent transactions during the 1950s and 60s, facilitated by the same families who still controlled the county government, the Washington family holdings had been reduced to a fraction of their original size. What we're seeing here, testified a historian specializing in black land ownership, is not an isolated incident, but the continuation of a century-long pattern of dispossession. After Reconstruction, black Americans owned 15 million acres of land. Today, it's down to less than 4 million. This case exemplifies the methods used to accomplish that theft. The mineral rights alone on Jasmine's 15 acres were valued at over $8 million. The total value of the deposits across all the targeted properties exceeded $100 million. This explained the desperate measures employed by Brooks and his conspirators, as well as the high-level involvement of state officials like Attorney General Carson. They were willing to destroy lives, fabricate criminal charges, and even commit murder. The federal prosecutor summarized, all to control land that rightfully belonged to these families. Judge Harris and Sheriff Brooks had both accepted plea deals providing testimony against Attorney General Carson, who maintained his innocence despite mounting evidence. Mayor Whitfield, facing lesser charges due to his cooperation, had provided detailed accounts of meetings with investors and state officials where the plan to acquire the properties was explicitly discussed. As the case gained national attention, Jasmine found herself thrust into an unexpected role as the face of a growing movement against land theft and systemic racism in property rights. News programs featured her story, highlighting both her military service and her fight against corruption at home. "The real heroes are the community members who risked everything," she insisted during one interview with Atlas and Shadow, sitting attentively beside her. "People like Pastor Green, Dr. Williams, Elijah Johnson, they stood up when it would have been easier to stay silent." The publicity brought support but also danger. White supremacist groups posted threats online, forcing Jasmine to implement advanced security protocols around her farm. Sarah Thompson installed cutting-edge systems, and a rotation of veterans from Jasmine's former unit volunteered to provide additional protection. Despite these precautions, there were disturbing incidents. Jasmine's rebuilt mailbox was destroyed again. Shots were fired near her property line on 2 occasions. And most alarmingly, someone left a doll with a noose around its neck on her front porch. A camera failure that night prevented identification of the perpetrator. The legal proceedings continued methodically, with more than 30 officials and business people eventually indicted. The Chinese investment group withdrew from Project Harvest Moon, issuing a statement that they had been misled about the legal status of the properties. Prosecutors were building toward indictments of several federal officials believed to have facilitated the scheme when disaster struck. A fire broke out in the Weston County Courthouse late one night, destroying a records room containing key evidence. Though backup copies existed of many documents, some original deeds and surveys were lost forever. The fire marshal declared it arson, but could not identify the perpetrator. Federal Protective Services increased security around witnesses and evidence, but the message was clear. Powerful forces still wanted to prevent the full truth from emerging. 3 months into the investigation, on a rainy Tuesday evening, Jasmine returned home from a community meeting to find her front door slightly ajar. Atlas and Shadow immediately tensed, sensing something wrong. She reached for her phone to call for backup, but before she could dial, a familiar voice came from her darkened living room. "I wouldn't bother with that call, Ms. Washington. We have a private matter to discuss." Attorney General Carson sat in her armchair, a pistol resting casually on his knee. He'd somehow bypassed all of Sarah's security systems. "Your dogs can join us," he said with a cold smile. "I've taken precautions against their particular talents." Jasmine stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her jacket, as Atlas and Shadow flanked her protectively. She assessed the situation with the calm calculation that had kept her alive in combat. Carson had made one critical mistake. He'd come alone, believing himself untouchable. But he'd also managed to infiltrate her home undetected, which meant he had resources and skills she hadn't anticipated. "You've caused quite a stir, Miss Washington," Carson continued, gesturing with the gun for her to enter and close the door. Disrupted plans, years in the making, cost people in very high places a great deal of money and influence. Lightning flashed outside, momentarily illuminating his face, not angry, but coldly calculating. "Now we need to discuss how this ends before more people get hurt." "Let me be clear about your situation," Attorney General Carson said, his voice steady as rain pounded against the windows. "This isn't just about mineral rights or county corruption anymore. You've stumbled into something much bigger." Jasmine remained in the doorway, Atlas and Shadow perfectly still, beside her awaiting commands. She noticed a plate on the floor near Carson, remnants of raw meat, with a distinctive chemical smell that her trained senses identified immediately. "You tried to poison my dogs," she observed calmly. Carson smiled thinly. "Insurance policy, military-grade sedatives. They should be unconscious by now if they'd taken the bait." He gestured again with the pistol. "Close the door and sit down. We have terms to discuss." Jasmine complied, closing the door against the storm while assessing the room for tactical advantages. Carson had positioned himself with clear sight lines to all entrances a professional setup. This wasn't an impulsive act of desperation, but a calculated operation. "The consortium I represent has investments across 12 states," Carson explained, watching her with cold eyes. "The rare earth minerals under this county are just one small piece of a national resource acquisition strategy. The Chinese were merely convenient partners, easily replaced." He leaned forward slightly. "Here's what happens next. You sign these papers transferring your property to a holding company. You make a public statement about your PTSD, causing you to imagine conspiracy theories. Then you leave Georgia and never return." "And if I refuse?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer. Carson's smile never reached his eyes. "Then, unfortunately, a disturbed veteran with a history of mental health issues took her own life, tragically killing her dogs first. Sheriff Brooks may face consequences for his overzealous methods, but the broader investigation dies with you." He produced a folder of documents. "These transfers have already been backdated. Judge Harris signed them before his arrest. One way or another, this land will be developed." Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows. Jasmine calculated her options, remembering similar high-pressure negotiations in combat zones. Carson believed he held all the leverage, which was his weakness. "What about the other families?" she asked, buying time. "Elijah Johnson, the Thompsons' Pastor Green's church land. They'll be approached with similar arrangements," Carson replied. "Those who cooperate will be generously compensated. Those who don't will face consequences tailored to their particular vulnerabilities." His casual cruelty confirmed what Jasmine already knew. This man would never allow justice to prevail if it conflicted with his interests. He represented a system that had been dispossessing black landowners for generations, simply finding new legal fictions to justify the same old theft. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the room. In that instant, Jasmine gave a silent hand signal, a combat command she'd developed for situations requiring absolute synchronization. Atlas and Shadow remained motionless, but their eyes tracked the signal. "You know what's truly ironic?" Carson continued, unaware of the communication. "Your great-grandfather sold the mineral rights to most of this land back in 1927. He couldn't read the contract he thumbprinted. Legally, you never owned what's beneath your property in the first place." Jasmine's expression remained neutral. "Is that why you had my uncle killed? Because he found the original deeds?" Carson's smile faltered slightly. "William Washington's accident was unfortunate but necessary. He was accessing archived records that should have been destroyed decades ago." He shifted the gun, pointing it more directly at Jasmine. "I need your decision now. Sign the papers, or this ends tragically for you and your precious war dogs." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "Those precious war dogs have one quality you didn't account for in your planning." Carson raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "They can tell the difference between poisoned meat and clean food from 50 feet away. It's how they kept soldiers from eating contaminated rations in Afghanistan." Before Carson could process this information, Jasmine gave another silent command. Atlas and Shadow exploded into action with military precision. Shadow circled left, creating a distraction that drew Carson's aim momentarily away from Jasmine. Simultaneously, Atlas launched forward in a controlled takedown maneuver, striking Carson's gun arm with pinpoint accuracy. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as Atlas's weight bore the Attorney General to the floor. Within seconds, both dogs had him immobilized, not with bites or aggression, but with the specialized compliance techniques they'd been trained to use against insurgents. Shadow secured the weapon while Atlas maintained pressure on Carson's chest, just enough to restrict movement without causing injury. "Impossible!" Carson gasped, genuine fear replacing his arrogance. "The sedative—" never touched their tongues. Jasmine finished activating the lights. They're trained to simulate ingestion when they detect chemical contaminants, another tactic that saved lives overseas. The front door burst open, revealing Miguel Rivera and 2 state police officers, weapons drawn. "We got your signal," Miguel said, moving quickly to secure Carson. "The AG's unmarked vehicle triggered the perimeter sensors Sarah installed last week." As the officers handcuffed Carson, Jasmine retrieved a small recording device from Atlas's collar. Full confession captured, plus the attempted murder and the admission about my uncle's death. Carson's face contorted with rage. "This changes nothing. You have no idea how high this goes or who you're really fighting against." One of the state officers, Captain Reynolds, shook his head. "Actually, sir, we have a pretty good idea now. Your secure servers weren't as secure as you thought. The federal task force has been mapping your entire network for weeks." He nodded respectfully to Jasmine. "Ms. Washington's military cybersecurity specialist gave us access to communications that implicate officials in 3 state governments and 2 federal agencies." The evidence Jasmine and her allies had gathered proved devastating. In the months that followed, indictments reached into the highest levels of state government and beyond. The investigation uncovered a decades-long conspiracy to systematically dispossess black landowners of valuable properties across the Southeast, using everything from legal manipulation to outright criminal intimidation. 1 year after her confrontation with Sheriff Brooks, Jasmine stood on the porch of her restored farmhouse watching as construction crews broke ground on the new Washington Training Center for Service Animals. Using settlement funds and grants, she had established a national program to train service dogs specifically for black veterans suffering from PTSD and physical disabilities. The center also included a legal aid office specializing in land rights cases and historical property theft. Through class action lawsuits and federal intervention, many families began receiving compensation for land stolen generations earlier. Elijah Johnson, now 93, had lived to see his family's original 100-acre farm restored to his ownership. The fraudulent transactions that had reduced it to 10 acres finally invalidated. Pastor Green's church established a community land trust that protected historically black-owned properties from future predatory practices. Jasmine had declined numerous offers to run for political office, preferring to work directly with the communities and veterans she served. Atlas and Shadow, now semi-retired from active service, helped train the next generation of service dogs. On this particular evening, as the Georgia sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a group of young black veterans gathered on her training field. Each worked with a dog in training, learning the commands and bonds that would help them navigate civilian life with their invisible wounds. Jasmine walked among them, offering guidance and encouragement, Atlas and Shadow following with the dignified bearing of seasoned warriors. Later, as the veterans departed and twilight settled over the farm, Jasmine sat on her porch steps between her faithful companions. Atlas rested his head on her knee, his military tags catching the last light of day. Shadow remained alert, old habits ensuring that at least one of them always kept watch. The land beneath them still contained millions of dollars worth of rare minerals. Numerous companies had approached with legitimate offers to lease mining rights, all of which Jasmine had declined. Some things were more valuable than money, like heritage justice and the right to determine your own destiny on land that rightfully belonged to your family. As darkness fell completely, Jasmine scratched behind Atlas's ears the simple gesture acknowledging the extraordinary journey they'd taken together. From war zones in distant lands to a different kind of battle on home soil, they had remained loyal, brave, and ultimately victorious against enemies who underestimated them at every turn. The Washington farm stood as living proof that even the most entrenched systems of injustice could be overcome with courage, strategy, and the unwavering belief that right could triumph over might, especially when backed by 2 very special dogs with military tags. What would you do if faced with corruption and injustice in your own community? Would you have the courage to stand up like Jasmine did? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all fight systemic racism and corruption in our communities. If this story of bravery and justice inspired you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories, and share with someone who needs to hear that justice is possible even against overwhelming odds. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember, sometimes true heroes walk on four legs, but it takes human courage to unleash them against injustice. Jasmine Washington's story teaches us that systemic racism often hides behind badges, legal documents, and official procedures designed to appear legitimate. Her journey reveals how corruption targets black landowners through seemingly legal means, property tax manipulation, fabricated violations, and fraudulent charges, all tactics used for generations to strip wealth from black communities. Yet her story also demonstrates the power of community resistance when organized with strategy and determination. By applying her military training to civilian injustice, Jasmine shows that systems of oppression can be dismantled when evidence is meticulously gathered and alliances are strategically formed. The victory wasn't just about her land, but about exposing historical patterns of dispossession affecting countless families. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that justice requires both individual courage and collective action. A decorated veteran and her loyal companions couldn't have succeeded without a network of allies willing to risk everything for what was right. True change happens when people recognize that injustice to one is injustice to all. What systems of injustice exist in your own community that might be hidden behind legal procedures? Have you witnessed discrimination disguised as enforcement of rules or regulations? Comment below with your experiences or observations of modern-day discrimination that hides behind official actions. If you believe in standing against racism wherever it appears, please hit that like button to help this story reach others who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resistance against systemic oppression throughout American history. Share this video with someone who might not understand how racism operates in sophisticated ways beyond obvious slurs and violence. Thank you for bearing witness to Jasmine's fight for justice. May her courage inspire us all to examine the structures around us and stand firm when confronted with injustice, regardless of how powerful the opposition may seem.